I walked back into that office building on a Monday morning in April, carrying a pump bag, a travel mug, and 3 months of documentation my boss had no idea existed. He fired me at 9:14 a.m. By 2:30 that afternoon, he was sitting across from HR with a lawyer on the phone and a look on his face I will carry with me for the rest of my life. My name is Nadia Reeves. I'm 31 years old. I had been a senior marketing analyst at Mercer & Voss Communications in Austin, Texas for 4 years when my daughter Ellie was born. And what I'm about to tell you is the story of the 12 weeks I spent on maternity leave, building the case that ended my boss's career, while he spent those same 12 weeks assuming I'd be too tired and too grateful for my job to fight back. He was wrong about a lot of things. Subscribe, drop your city below, and stay with me. This is the one I've been waiting to tell. I need to start 6 months before the firing, before the paperwork and the lawyers and the HR meeting that changed everything. I need to start with the moment I understood what kind of man Daniel Marsh really was. Daniel Marsh, Regional Director of Marketing at Mercer & Voss. 44 years old, tall, the kind of man who wore his confidence like a second blazer, never off, always pressed. He had been my direct supervisor for 3 of my 4 years at the company. For the first 2 of those years, our relationship was professional and functional. He gave strong performance reviews. I delivered strong results. The system worked. Then I announced my pregnancy. I announced it at 11 weeks in a one-on-one meeting, which is what the HR handbook recommended. I told him calmly, professionally. I had my maternity leave dates prepared. I had a transition plan ready. Who would cover what projects, what the handoff timeline looked like, how I'd stay reachable during the first few weeks if critical things came up. He looked at the transition plan I'd printed. He looked at me, and he said, "We'll have to see how this affects your trajectory here. Not congratulations. Not we'll make it work. Not even a neutral acknowledgement. We'll have to see how this affects your trajectory." I wrote that sentence down in a notes app on my phone at 2:47 that afternoon, with a timestamp, because something in me, some quiet, clear-eyed instinct, said, "Save this." That was the beginning. Over the next 4 months, I became a very careful observer of my own professional life. The first thing I noticed was the meetings. Before my pregnancy announcement, I had been included in the Thursday strategy sessions, a standing weekly meeting with Daniel, the 2 senior account directors, and the VP of Client Services. I had been attending for 18 months. My contributions were in the meeting notes. My name was on the project proposals that came out of those sessions. 3 weeks after I told Daniel I was pregnant, the Thursday meeting time changed. My calendar invite was updated. Same time, same room, new attendee list. My name was not on it. I forwarded the original calendar invite and the updated one to my personal email. I noted the date. The second thing was the performance feedback. In February, I received my annual review. Daniel rated me meets expectations across every category. For the previous 3 years, I had been rated exceeds expectations in 4 of 6 categories. My salary increase was 1.4%. The previous year, it had been 5.2%. I requested a copy of the review through HR's formal record system and saved it alongside my previous 3 years of reviews. The third thing was what I overheard. In March, 8 weeks before my leave was scheduled to begin, I was working late. The office floor was mostly empty. Daniel's glass-walled office was at the far end, and his door was slightly open. I was at my desk, headphones off, finishing a deck. His voice carried. He was on the phone. I caught fragments. "She's gone in 6 weeks anyway. Fresh eyes on this. Someone who's actually going to be present." And then, quieter but still audible, "I need someone I can build with. not someone who's going to be half here. I opened a new note. I typed what I'd heard. I timestamped it. I did not say anything to Daniel. I did not say anything to anyone at work. I went home and I called an employment lawyer named Christine Park. I'd found her through a friend who'd used her in a contract dispute. Christine had 15 years of FMLA and Title VII litigation experience. She had settled 12 pregnancy discrimination cases in the previous 4 years. Her office was in Austin, on 6th Street, and she answered her own phone. I told her what I had: the trajectory comment, the meeting exclusion, the downgraded review, the overheard call. Then she said, "Keep collecting, don't confront him, don't change your behavior, and call me the day before you go on leave." I did exactly that. Ellie was born on January 9th, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, dark hair, the most specific and overwhelming thing that has ever happened to me. I went on FMLA leave January 11th, 12 weeks, fully compliant with federal law, fully documented by HR. My leave dates were in writing. My return date was in writing. April 7th, a Monday. I spent the first 3 weeks learning how to keep a small person alive and not thinking about Mercer and Voss at all. Around week 4, I started thinking again. Not obsessively, not in a way that took me away from Ellie, but in the specific, methodical way that Christine had encouraged, the way of someone who knows what's coming and wants to be ready. I started by requesting my full HR personnel file. Under federal law, employees are entitled to review their employment records. I sent the formal request by email and kept the thread. I received a digital copy of my file within 10 days. In that file was something I had not been told about: a performance improvement plan, a PIP, dated December, 3 weeks before my leave began. I had never been shown this document. I had never signed it. It was in my file as a draft with Daniel Marsh's name on the author line. I forwarded it to Christine immediately. She called me within the hour. A performance improvement plan that was drafted but never presented to the employee, placed in their file shortly before maternity leave, and then pulled out as justification for termination upon return. This is a documented pattern in pregnancy discrimination cases. The EEOC has specific guidance on it. It has a name in employment law: pretextual documentation. He was building his exit ramp, Christine said, and he thought you wouldn't find it until it was too late. I pulled Ellie close and looked at the ceiling for a while. Then I got to work. Over the next 8 weeks, I built the case file that Christine would eventually describe as among the clearest pattern documentation she'd seen outside of a formal EEOC investigation. Here is what I gathered, in order: the trajectory comment, my notes, time-stamped, written the same afternoon, corroborated by a second piece. I have mentioned it to a colleague named Priya Desai in passing that same week, and Priya had responded by text. I have that text chain: the meeting exclusion, the original calendar invite with my name, the updated invite without it. Sent to Christine with the meeting notes from 3 subsequent Thursday sessions. Notes that reference decisions I would have contributed to, with no mention of my input. The performance review, all 4 years of reviews, side by side. The pattern was visible without explanation. The overheard call, my time-stamped note. Not a recording. I hadn't had the foresight for that. But Christine explained that contemporaneous notes are admissible and carry significant evidentiary weight, particularly when supported by other documentation. The PIP, the unsigned, undisclosed draft in my personnel file, this was the strongest piece. And then, in week 10 of my leave, I received something I hadn't expected: an email from Priya. She sent it to my personal address carefully. She told me she wanted me to know something: that the week after I left for maternity leave, Daniel had given my primary account, the Harrington Group campaign, which I have been building for 8 months, to a new hire named Brandon Cole. that Brandon had been introduced to the Harrington team as the new lead without any mention of transition or handoff. That Priya had asked Daniel directly why I hadn't been consulted. That Daniel had said, and she was quoting this directly, "Nadia's situation is fluid. We're planning for continuity." I read that email 3 times. Nadia's situation is fluid. I was on federally protected maternity leave. My return date was in writing. My situation was not fluid. My situation was April 7th. I forwarded the email to Christine with one word: ready. She replied, almost. 1 more week. April 6th, Sunday evening. Ellie was asleep. She was 12 weeks old and had started smiling. Real smiles, not reflex, actual recognition. And every time she did it, I felt something that had no word in English. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and Christine on the phone. We went through everything one final time. The documentation package she had organized, 47 pages, tabs, references, the timeline exhibit, starting from the day I announced my pregnancy through the present. An EEOC charge of discrimination, drafted and ready to file. A demand letter ready to send to Mercer and Voss's general counsel. Christine walked me through what she expected to happen the next morning. "He's going to call you in early," she said, within the first hour. "He's going to tell you there's been a restructuring, or that your role has evolved, or that there are performance concerns he needs to discuss. He'll have talking points. He may have someone from HR in the room as a witness, or he may not, which would be its own violation. He'll expect you to be emotional. He'll expect you to be tired. He'll expect you not to know your rights." What do? You let him finish. You don't argue. You don't cry. You ask for everything in writing. A pause. And then you go to your car and you call me. I put Ellie to bed at 8. I set my alarm for 6. I ironed a blazer. I went to sleep. April 7th, Monday, 7:58 a.m. I swiped my badge at the main entrance of Mercer and Voss Communications on Converse Avenue. The lobby was the same marble-floored, glass-ceiling atrium it had always been. The security guard at the desk, Marcus, who'd been there my entire 4 years, looked up and smiled. "Welcome back," he said. I said it and meant it. I took the elevator to the 4th floor. My desk was exactly as I'd left it, which told me no one had used it in my absence, which was its own data point. I set down my bag. I turned on my monitor. I had been at my desk for approximately 11 minutes when Daniel's assistant, a young woman named Becca, appeared beside me. "Daniel would like to see you when you have a moment," she said. Her voice was slightly too careful. I'd known Becca for 2 years. She knew how to carry a neutral message. This wasn't neutral. This was a woman who'd been told something she was trying not to show. "Of course," I said. "I'll head over now." I picked up a notepad. I picked up a pen. I did not pick up the documentation package. That was in my car, where Christine had told me to leave it. I walked to Daniel's office. He was standing when I came in. Not seated behind his desk. Standing near the window with that particular arrangement of posture that people use when they've decided a conversation is going to be brief. There was a woman I recognized seated to the left. Diane Cho, HR business partner. Her hands were folded on the table. The fact that Diane was there was important. It meant this had been coordinated with HR in advance. It meant there was already a record of this meeting being planned. Daniel gestured to the chair across from the small conference table he'd arranged. He sat. He cleared his throat. He said, and I will give you these words exactly because I wrote them down the moment I got to my car. "Nadia, thank you for coming in. We're really glad you're back, but I have to be straight with you. While you've been out, we've done a structural evaluation of the marketing team, and your role in its current form has been eliminated. This isn't a performance issue. This is about the direction of the department. We have a severance package ready, and HR has some paperwork for you. I looked at him. I looked at Diane. I said, I'd like that in writing, please. All of it. The restructuring decision, the effective date, the severance terms, and the documentation of who made this decision and when. Diane made a note. Daniel nodded, said of course. I said, thank you. I'll need to step out briefly. I have a call I need to take. He blinked. He had expected tears or protest or questions he had answers prepared for. I stood. I picked up my notepad. I walked to the elevator. I walked through the lobby. Marcus held the door. I sat in my car and called Christine. He did it, she said. Not a question. He did it. Restructuring? Restructuring. Diane Cho from HR was in the room. Was Diane there when he made the announcement, or did he call you in alone first? She was there from the start. He'd set the room up in advance. A pause. That's a coordination problem for them. Let me call you back in 20 minutes. Christine called back in 18. Here's what's happening now, she said. I'm sending a letter to Mercer and Voss's general counsel today. Formal notice of representation and a request for preservation of all communications and records related to your employment and separation, going back 18 months. That triggers a legal hold. They cannot destroy anything. Okay. Simultaneously, I'm filing an EEOC charge of discrimination. Pregnancy discrimination under Title VII, FMLA retaliation, and discriminatory application of the performance review process. The charge will be filed today, and I need you to go back inside and do two things. Request your termination letter in writing. You've already done that. Good. And ask Diane Cho directly whether the position that's being eliminated will be posted or filled. Get her answer in writing or in front of a witness. Why? Because Brandon Cole is sitting in your job. If they post your role or fill it, which they will have to do, that eliminates the restructuring defense entirely. I sat with that for a moment. Nadia. He made a $200,000 mistake this morning. Let's go make sure he knows it. I went back inside. I found Diane in the hallway outside the elevator bank, which I suspected was not an accident. I told her I had one question before I reviewed the severance paperwork. I asked her, would the role being eliminated be posted or filled in any capacity going forward? She paused. She said she wasn't aware of any plans to post the role. I said, is Brandon Cole currently functioning as the lead on the Harrington Group account? A longer pause. She said she'd have to check on that. I thanked her. I went to HR's administrative office and formally requested my personnel file, again, in writing. I received written confirmation of the request. I collected the severance paperwork without signing it. I returned to my car. She paused before answering, I told her. That's enough, Christine said. We have what we need. At 2:17 p.m. that afternoon, Daniel Marsh was called into a meeting with Mercer and Voss's general counsel, their outside employment law firm, and the vice president of human resources. He had not been told the meeting's subject in advance. The agenda, as I later learned through the legal discovery process, included 3 items: Christine's formal representation letter, the EEOC charge filed that morning, and a preliminary review of the documentation Christine had attached to the charge, a summary of the 47-page package, covering the timeline from my pregnancy announcement through the morning's termination. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Daniel Marsh's employment at Mercer and Voss Communications was terminated effective that day. Not a restructuring, not a performance issue, just terminated. I want to tell you about the legal process because I think it matters to understand what documentation actually does. Christine filed a formal EEOC charge citing violations of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. specifically the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, and Section 105 of the FMLA, which prohibits retaliation against employees for exercising their leave rights. The charge named Mercer and Voss as the respondent and cited the following specific violations: meeting exclusion following protected announcement, documented by calendar records; pretextual performance downgrade, documented by 4 years of comparative reviews; undisclosed PIP placed in personnel file during protected leave period; reassignment of primary account during leave, without notification or consultation; termination on the day of return from federally protected leave, using a restructuring rationale that was contradicted by the continued presence of the reassigned employee in the same functional role. Christine also flagged something the general counsel's team had not caught. Diane Cho had been in the room for the termination meeting, which created a legal record that HR had coordinated with Daniel in advance of my return, without conducting an independent review of the termination's legal exposure. That was Mercer and Voss's problem, not just Daniel's. The settlement was reached 14 weeks after I was fired. I am not going to give you the exact number because the agreement included a confidentiality provision, and I'm being careful about what I characterize as fact versus the shape of what happened. What I will tell you is this: Christine told me, before we accepted the offer, that EEOC retaliation settlements in cases with this level of documentation typically range between $175,000 and $310,000. She told me ours was toward the upper end of that range. She told me that was before attorney's fees, which the settlement covered separately. She also told me, and this is the part I want you to hear, that the documentation was the case. Not her arguments, not my testimony. The timestamps, the saved emails, the forwarded calendar invites, the personnel file request I'd sent on week 4 of leave, the contemporaneous note I'd typed at 2:47 on the afternoon he said, trajectory. Every piece of paper I had gathered, quietly, without confrontation, without announcing what I was doing. That was what made the difference. He thought you were resting, Christine said on the day we signed. I was resting, I told her, and documenting. She laughed. In addition to the financial settlement, the consent agreement required Mercer and Voss to conduct mandatory employment law training for all managers and HR staff within 90 days, implement a formal policy requiring HR sign-off on any termination within 12 months of an employee returning from FMLA leave, and retain an independent employment law monitor for 2 years. These are the things that don't show up in a headline, but that actually change something, because this wasn't just about me. 6 women worked on Daniel Marsh's team over his 6 years at Mercer and Voss. I know of 2 who left quietly within months of pregnancy announcements, with vague explanations about fit or direction. I'm not in contact with them. I don't know their full stories. But the policy Mercer and Voss now has in place, the one that requires independent HR review before any such termination can proceed, that policy exists now. It wasn't there before. I didn't get to be angry in that office on April 7th. I had chosen deliberately not to be. But the policy is the anger, converted into something permanent. That's what documentation does when you let it. 2 things I want to tell you about the morning of April 7th that didn't make it into the legal record. The first, when I walked back into the building after my call with Christine, when I crossed back through those glass doors, knowing what was already in motion, Marcus at the security desk looked up and said, "You okay?" I told him yes. He gave me the look of a man who has watched a lot of people walk through a lobby and can tell when the answer is more complicated than it sounds. He held the door again. The second, Becca, Danny's assistant, caught me in the hallway just before I left for the last time. She looked at me with the expression of someone who has something to say and not enough safety to say it. I gave her my personal email address and said, quietly, "If you ever need to tell someone something, I'm a good person to tell." She nodded. She didn't email me. I hope she found another job. Ellie is 5 months old now. She discovered them last week, looked down and appeared genuinely astonished that they existed, then immediately tried to eat them, which is the appropriate response. I work 3 days a week, remotely for a consultancy that reached out to me 2 months after the settlement. Full benefits, better base, no commute. The work is good, the people are decent. My manager is a woman who has 2 kids of her own and once said to me in a video call, without looking up from her screen, "Never apologize for blocking your calendar for school pickup. That's just what we do here." I didn't cry. I was on a video call. It was close. I think about Daniel Marsh sometimes. Not often, not with satisfaction exactly. Satisfaction requires a kind of pleasure I don't feel when I think about the specifics of what he did. What I feel is something more like clarity. He looked at me, at a woman who had just told him she was pregnant, who had printed a transition plan, who had her leave dates and her return date organized before she'd even told her own parents. And he saw someone whose trajectory was his to control. He didn't see the notes app. He didn't see the email folder. He didn't see the lawyer's number I'd had in my phone since week 16 of my pregnancy. He saw a woman who was going to be tired and grateful and too overwhelmed to look closely. He was so confident in that assumption. I was counting on it. If you're listening to this and you're in a workplace where something feels wrong, where the trajectory comment came and you tucked it away and kept going, I want to say this. You are allowed to document, quietly, carefully, without announcement. Time-stamped notes are real evidence. Forwarded emails are real evidence. A personnel file request is a legal right in every state. An employment lawyer's first consultation is free at most firms. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You just have to be precise. That's my story. If it made you feel something, share it. Subscribe if you haven't, and tell me in the comments, have you ever had to stay quiet while you built something they couldn't see coming? I'll read every single one.